Welcome to The Blue Dot, Northern Kentucky's premier political podcast, brought to you by the Kenton County Democratic Executive Committee. Welcome back to The Blue Dot podcast for our weekly roundup, where we deliver all the news you need to know in 10 minutes or less. Thanks for joining. I'm Natalie MacDonald.
And I'm Brian Koehl, and today, April 9th, is Local News Day, a nationwide celebration of the trusted, community-based journalism that keeps us informed and connected. The movement invites everyone to start listening local by supporting the stories that shape our everyday lives. Hey, and we're absolutely here for it.
We sure are, Brian. As our listeners know, the weekly roundup focuses on local news happening right now in our own backyards and some of the national news that trickles down to everyday Kentuckians. And honestly, the state of the nation is so grim right now that I don't have the energy to cover it. So I thought we could sum it up with a quick pop quiz before we dive into all things Kentucky. You want to help me out with these questions, Brian?
Okay, let's do it.
First question is, did Iran control the Strait of Hormuz before Trump's war of choice?
Nope, but they do now, and they are actually making money off of charging tolls to get through.
Yeah, and I heard Trump say that he wants to partner with them on that, so always making a buck. Second question, was Iran ruled by an extremist regime before Trump's war of choice?
Yes, but the Ayatollah Khamenei has been replaced by his son, a younger, more extreme version of his father.
Okay, but did they have uranium before?
Yes, they did. And guess what? They still do. But now without any of the previous restrictions or inspections. If you remember, there was a deal brokered by Obama during his last term. Iran agreed to restrict its uranium enrichment activities for 10 to 15 years, including capping enrichment levels at 3.67%, which is well below the 90% required for weapons-grade material. And Iran also agreed to allow the International Atomic Energy Agency, or IAEA, enhanced 24/7 access to monitor all of their declared nuclear sites and investigate potential covert sites. So all of that, however, was ripped up by Trump during his first term, citing the agreement was, quote, defective at its core. Now, there were critics of the agreement who maintained that Iran gained financial benefits from it, but it seems the main reason Trump pulled out of the deal is his obsession with undoing everything Obama achieved during his presidency.
Exactly, and look where we are now. Last question for you. Did we have sanctions on Iran and Russian oil before Trump's war of choice?
God, I hate these answers. Yes, we sure did. But guess what? These oil sanctions were lifted. It marks a stunning reversal of longstanding American policy as the Trump regime scrambles to contain the impact of its war on Iran and somehow manage, gasoline and oil prices and the energy markets.
So in summary, what you're saying is we invaded Iran with zero ally support, congressional or public approval. We lost 13 service members, wounded hundreds, spent billions, which has resulted in Iran having more control, making more money with no oversight on their nuclear program. And we, the people of the United States, are paying for it in pretty much every aspects of our lives financially. Is that right?
That sums it up there, Natalie. I heard the last number I heard was $44 billion has been spent thus far, and that was like 3 or 4 days ago.
Wow.
And don't forget, while the U.S. is mired in its disastrous war with Iran, our vice president is deeply entrenched in negotiations to end the conflict. Psych. Just kidding. No. One might think that's what a VP should be doing during wartime, but instead our stooge J.D. Vance was in Hungary, stumping for the re-election of that country's autocrat, Viktor Orban. You remember Orban, don't you?
Right.
The guy who recently pledged undying support for Russian president and war criminal Vladimir Putin? Yeah, America's leaders are openly and nakedly siding with the dictators and war criminals of the world. Hey, everybody, don't let all of the chaos Trump and his clown car has unleashed upon the world distract you from this fundamental reality.
Yeah, and if Vance was paying a little bit more attention, maybe to understand what was happening with the ceasefire. Because yesterday he said that when Israel bombed Lebanon, that was just a misunderstanding. And today he said, no, that's not included in the ceasefire. So overnight we saw Lebanon be bombed with 10 minutes of complete destruction, killing at least 203 people and wounding over 1,000. So it's just unimaginable death and and destruction. If we could only veto all of this and all of Trump's terrible policies, but unfortunately we cannot. But what is happening in Kentucky, we'll bring this back home on the veto speak. We mentioned last week we're currently in what's called a veto recess in the Kentucky General Assembly. We spent a lot of time talking about the bills that were moving through the legislature, but what we didn't get into were the shell bills. And that's something that every Kentuckian should understand. Brian, do you think we can break this down a little bit, what these shell bills are?
Sure, yeah. Shell bills in the Kentucky legislature are essentially placeholder bills. They're filed before the legislative deadline, but contain little to no real substance, often just technical language or vague references. Lawmakers, especially committee chairs, use these to beat the clock. They file a bill filled with tech speak or vague fluff, only to amend it at the very last second with massive, brand new laws that nobody has had time to read.
What's that actually look like in practice? Do we have any examples from this session?
Yeah, actually, a perfect example of this is House Bill 900. On the surface, it looks like a simple piggy bank for state projects between 2026 and 2028. However, it doesn't mention which projects, which agencies, or even how much money is being moved.
So they're just saying, hey, set aside this big mountain of cash, and then we're going to buy a bunch of stuff. And then after we spend it, we're going to tell you about it. And we're going to talk about this behind closed doors.
Yeah, it's kind of like giving a credit card to your kids.
Right. Exactly.
I mean, that about sums it up, Natalie. And, this isn't just a one-off fluke. It's a major trend. I mean, this year alone, nearly 150 shell bills were filed, making up 11% of the entire legislative slate. And while the GOP supermajority argues that this is just a way to keep things moving efficiently, Dems are asking, I think a pretty fair question. How can anyone be expected to vote on a bill when the bill is basically a coming soon poster?
Right.
I mean, this should raise serious red flags as it speaks directly to the lack of transparency we're seeing under Kentucky's Republican supermajority.
Yeah, and perhaps one of the most honest yet slightly terrifying takes came from my state senator, Chris McDaniel. He was asked about this and if the public would ever actually get to see what's inside these mystery bills before they pass. And his response was basically shrugged it off and said that he hoped that people could see, but he said, quote, he certainly could not guarantee it.
Yeah, and that right there tells you everything you need to know. There was another big transparency story in the news this week, once again, on the Republican side of the aisle coming out of Louisville. And this one deals with skimming off of nonprofits.
Yes, I saw that. It turns out Republican State Senator Julie Raque Adams is under the microscope for her ties to a not-for-profit called Kentucky Strong. On paper, it sounds great. The organization is supposed to be all about empowering conservative women in public policy. In practice, however, it looks like a private fund for the senator herself.
Yeah, public records show that Senator Adams, who actually directs the nonprofit, received about $80,000 from the group over the last few years. Now, here is where it gets pretty shady. The nonprofit's only donors are massive companies that spend their days lobbying the Kentucky legislature. Big names like Churchill Downs, Revolutionary Racing, LG&E, and Charter Communications. Since late 2022, these groups have poured over $100,000 into the pot. Even more eyebrow-raising, according to filings, the payments to Adams were the only expenses the nonprofit even reported since the start of 2023. Talk about a grifty operation.
Wow, that's unbelievable. So nationally, Kentucky Democrats are saying, hey, but there's something wrong here. So they've asked the Ethics Commission and the Attorney General to step in. So they're basically saying this is a classic pay-to-play case. Especially, and here's even more fun stuff, especially since Senator Adams chairs the committees that oversee the very industries who are cutting those checks.
This whole situation, it's like a massive red flag for dark money and transparency in the bluegrass state. While the national news was busy covering the latest offensive and terrifying rhetoric from the White House, on Tuesday, Democrats were quietly having one of their best election nights of the cycle. It just goes to show that when people start seeing what's actually happening behind the scenes in the GOP, the political scoreboard starts to look a whole lot different.
Yeah, this didn't get a lot of airtime because of everything else that is going on, but Democrats just put up some numbers that are turning heads from the Midwest to the Deep South. In the dairy state of Wisconsin, the Democratic-backed state Supreme Court candidate Judge Chris Taylor didn't just win the Supreme Court seat, she sailed to a nearly 20-point landslide. And that's a massive
Yeah.
swing for a battleground state that just 2 years ago went red. So it looks like the political vibes in Wisconsin have shifted from purple to a very deep shade of blue.
I love it.
Yes.
Down in Georgia's reddest district, the GOP may have kept the seat, but a Democratic challenger, Sean Harris, managed to slash the previous margin of victory by a whopping 2/3, around 25 points. The takeaway, even in a loss, this was the most dramatic overperformance Democrats have seen across all 7 House special elections this cycle.
Exactly. So it might have been a 1 win and 1 loss, but the underlying data suggests that the political winds are turning up a much bigger blue wave than experts have anticipated.
That's right.
Yeah.
And we want to keep growing that blue dot momentum. You can do that by taking grassroots action right in your very own backyard. The Kenton Dems are going to have 2 get out the vote canvases before the primary election. And I also want to encourage everyone to go to our primary election voter guide at kentoncountydemocrats.org. There you'll find literally everything you need to know, from how to check your registration to where to vote, and guides and a ton of information about each candidate. So be sure to check out those resources.
Yes, and I could tell you these efforts have been working, as we had 5 new precinct officers step up, which is awesome.
Great.
It's exactly what we need right now. And for anyone interested, there will be a precinct officer training on April 13th from 7 to 8 p.m. at the Kenton County Public Library. So if you're ready to get involved, there are plenty of opportunities to do so, because this is where we're going to be making a real impact.
Yeah, that's for sure. I mean, there are so many ways to get involved, from the Young Dems to the Kenton County Democratic Women's Club. They're all hosting events every month, to the Kentucky House Primary Candidate Forum on April 19th and the County Commissioner Primary Candidate Forum, which was just scheduled for May 6th. And I also just want to add a note that for our audience in surrounding counties, hey, check out the websites of your own county Democratic Party. We are seeing similar activities underway. We need a broad coalition of all Democrats and Democratic organizations to get active and push hard toward the midterms in November.
Yes, Northern Kentucky is going to be flipping some seats. I know it. It's going to be some very
Yes, sir.
exciting times. And I'd love to talk about all of those. But for today, our 10 minutes are up for the weekly roundup, where the news is fast and the facts are free. Until next time, stay curious, keep the facts in focus, never stop fighting for what matters. Peace out, everybody.